Compound interest basically uses this fundamental equation. Accumulated amount is principal times 1 plus I to the n. Okay, now, a good example of compound interest, and we've done this before, is the idea of, let's say, I'm going to take an amount, let's invest $10,000 at 9% compounded annually for 10 years. What is the accumulated amount? Now, accumulated amount is the same as, if you ever hear this term, future value. Future value. So they get used synonymously and interchangeably. All right. So all you'd have to do, you might say, is plug it in, but you've got to be careful that you really understand what n means. N is generally the time. Sometimes you see a t there. But in our case, we would use principal is how much? 10,000. And then that's times 1 plus, what's our interest rate? 0.09. Now notice I left a space there. If it's compounded annually, you only divide the interest rate by 1. That's why many times you don't even see that number. Okay? Annually, that's how it goes. All right? N is the number of compounding periods. So in our case, how many years did we do it over? 10. So we'd use 10. All right? See what you come up with for an accumulated amount. How much do you have? Now this one I would use 1 plus 0.09. 1.09 and raise it to the 10th power. Remember, powers come first. Times 10,000. How much would you have after that 10 years?
$23,673.64.
Good. All right. No problem, right? Pretty straightforward. The question now, if we didn't compound annually, but instead, let's say instead, same problem, we compound monthly. What is the accumulated amount? Okay? Now this is different. Notice the subtlety, ladies, on this one. I'm hoping that you do. The idea is that it's still, the principal is still 10,000. No problem there. 1 plus our rate is still how much? 9%. Notice we enter it as a decimal, 0.09. But if you compound monthly, just remember this subtle piece. You have to cut that in 12 parts. Because the money is compounded monthly. So that means you divide it by 12. So many lending institutions and many places that you invest, they say, oh, we don't compound annually. We compound monthly or quarterly or daily. So there you go. We'll raise that to, now would I use 10? What do you think goes here? If it's 12 times a year and you have 10 years, what would that be? 120, very good. So you'd have 120. Now, same thing, this is why it's nice to have a power key for the calculator. You take 0.09 and you divide by 12, and you add 1, raise it to the 120th power, just make sure you match up, take it times 10,000. What is the accumulated amount for this one?
24,513.85.
Perfect, nice job. So notice if you compare the two, the more often you compound, the higher it is, right? That makes sense. Now some people say, well, what if you compounded daily? I don't know, your credit cards that you use are generally compounded daily. Almost, I'd say 99% of them. All right, because the lending institution wants you to pay a little bit more if you miss a payment. But let's do this one daily, just to see if you get the idea. So what about daily? How do we set that up? 10,000 times, what would I put in the parentheses? 1 plus 0.09. Instead of monthly or annually, we divide by,
365.
you got it, good job. That's exactly right, Kate. So you divide by 365, so you raise it to the power. Now it's 10 years, 365 compounding periods a year. So what would this power be?
3,650.
That's right, 3,650. So again, you can see why it's good to use a calculator with a power key. So why don't you try that one out? You might get some funny numbers with an E in it, but that's okay. Take it times 10,000. And what do you come up with?
24,593.
593 and
30 cents.
30 cents. Okay, good. So now, one thing that people find, they say, if you compound daily, when you compound daily, shouldn't this thing explode much higher than this? But believe it or not, it is higher by, what is it, like about $80 roughly, from monthly to daily. But it's not as big as you might think. The idea is it cuts that interest rate in 365 parts and compounds it that many times a year over 10 years. So it is a higher return.